I was sitting here thinking, I remember we were talking earlier about your family's involvement with like Joe Kennedy getting into office. Could you elaborate a little bit on that as far as like what you know about that?
Well, I know my grandfather, didn't like Joe Kennedy Sr. I mean, they worked together, in Prohibition,
Okay.
Bringing in liquor from Canada, up to upstate New York. And then that's, that was your path of, what do you call it? The mule train.
Yeah.
That was their source. That was their supply chain. That's the word I was looking for. But if Kennedy had a boat, loaded down with booze, they also, usually had immigrants aboard, people smuggling.
Mm-hmm.
He would throw off the people before he would throw off the booze.
Damn.
And that always pissed my grandfather off.
Wow.
And just, saw the kind of character. So he was always, he never liked, Joe Kennedy. And he'd always, anytime, people always asked him, about the relationship with the Kennedy. Yeah, they had a relationship, but he didn't like him. He didn't like the character. He didn't like the person. And, and he would say the reason that, JFK got what he got was a lot because of the sins of the father. So
there was a lot of commingling back then with the mob and the government in terms of just a lot of stuff that took place.
Oh, absolutely. They were, they paid off judges and they had but it was all part of the, really part of the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody, especially in New York, they saw how, the mafiosi, how they lived their life and, the kind of respect that they got or, notoriety they got when they did stuff. So everybody wanted to be their friends, right? I mean, that was a New York thing. That's, and hence an American thing, but especially in New York. Yeah, they had, had their fingers in everywhere. And, my grandfather, when he describes the mafia, it's a collection of men who know how to do the right thing. And, you could be a barber, you could be, a judge. It didn't matter. If you were what he called a man of honor, you knew the code. You knew you had to take care of your family. You knew you couldn't, do certain things. Like if you slept with somebody's wife or somebody slept with your wife, yeah, you're duty bound to kill that guy.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just...
Yeah.
That's the rules. And, those guys all knew it. So not everybody was, a hitman or, going around and, breaking kneecaps. I mean, yeah, they had to enforce their rules and stuff, but, mostly it was a, understanding among men. Mm-hmm. And he'll talk to, he was very proud of the brotherhood that he built and, over the years. And anybody that didn't understand it, it was fine, but people in his tradition, yeah, he was pretty harsh on everybody following the code you refer to it as.
And as far as people being made in the mafia, I remember, and like I said, I'm just from outside looking in. Yep. Like in the movies, I remember, when Joe Pesci was supposed to get made, but you had to be Robert De Niro couldn't get made in Goodfellas because he wasn't Sicilian.
Right.
And you had to be, like, I don't know what you had to be, but what was that as far as qualifications in order to be made? Because you had people who were associates and some people who were made. And then I remember in that movie, also, you can't whack a made man. You just can't go.
Right. You didn't do that.
You couldn't do that. That was a no-no.
Right. And, in my dad's book, when he, was made, he has a description of the ceremony. And it was very close to what you've seen, mm-hmm. In those movies. Their difference, sometimes you burn a prayer card, sometimes you poke blood. There's a lot of different, representations of that. But yeah, it was an initiation ceremony, that they went through. A lot of times they say, oh, you have to kill somebody. No, you just have to be, a man of your word. You have mm-hmm. to, understand you're part of this thing. And there was a lot of different ways, you could become made, not just necessarily, knocking somebody off. But that's the, the popular perception that, everybody's gone with. And it's kind of an, romanticized story. That's the only way to do it. And yeah, there was an element to that, but it wasn't the whole thing.
Do you think that when they had these guys who became like termed rats when they started breaking off, that was like once they got to like the second generation? Because it seemed like the first generation, those guys, they lived by a certain code and they were just, it was like in their blood. Like you would never even consider that. And then it didn't happen until it seems like later in like the 70s when they had the first real guy who turned on the mob and he was like a actual high up member who started telling about the structure.
Well, yeah, that did happen. The first one was this Joe Balachi. It's called the Joe Balachi Papers.
I've heard of that.
And that was, but he wasn't very high up, but he did spill the beans, but he was kind of a low level guy. But that did give, Congress at the time, he testified before Congress, and, it gave him, it kind of exposed the whole structure for the very first time. And then, there's been guys like Sammy the Bull along the years that have,
kind of given more of an insight.
But then, the whole Donnie Brasco thing, they infiltrated, so they really got a lot of, information about how it all worked.
Yeah, because I look at it, it's pretty crazy, just, like you said, how organized, and how if they would have never had those people telling, they would have no idea of how the family moved and how far the reach was, construction, trash disposal, this, that, all these different rackets that, a lot of people would have no idea that was actually ran by this organization.
Yeah, absolutely. All those, like I was saying earlier, you could have been a shoe salesman, a dentist, in the, garbage business.
Yeah.
But, you didn't just go in and, start doing business in an area, at least in New York, right, without, finding out whose turf it was. That's and getting permissions and doing what you were supposed to. But, they were, this whole group of immigrants that came over, and they brought the old ways with them. And it worked, right? Having that structure, they ended up, naming it organized crime. But it was a, structure just among the people, because, like the Sicilians couldn't just go in and to a bank and get a loan, right?
That's right.
They had to go see the Godfather, and, he need money for this, and he would lend them. And so he became their banker. It was just their whole way of life.
So in essence, it helped almost like the economic structure of the community, because like you said, as immigrants, a lot of these bankers wouldn't give you the loans, or you couldn't have access to certain things. So if you were trying to open your own business, or open a restaurant, or start a business, this was another avenue, and it created almost like a blanket, because if your restaurant was open with the money from this guy, then that if somebody did something in your restaurant, you had to answer to this guy.
Absolutely. And, they didn't trust the government or the banks, because they had come from Italy and Sicily, where it was all, a lot of corruption. Well, they trusted, the local Don. They knew he was going to be there, that he was reliable. And,
that's right.
So they, would go to him first before they would even consider going to a bank. It would almost be an insult to the local Don if, somebody went and got a loan from a bank and started a restaurant. Not that it couldn't happen, but if you wanted to be part of the community, and you wanted to be successful in that community, you did it the right way.
You kept it close knit.
And like for the 30s, 40s, 50s, that was a good structure, and that structure worked, and that's why more people wanted to become part of it. So
now, looking at that structure and just how far things have changed, even in my opinion, it didn't seem like most of those guys, they weren't out, just, what do you call it, frolicking with a bunch of women and, getting high and partying. It's like you represented something, so you had to have some type of self-control, because that was a part of being somebody of clear mind and having good judgment.
Right. Well, and my dad, because back in, when I was a teenager and first started getting into, smoking pot, and, grew up in California, and it was, but he would always tell, how could you do that? How could you not be in your right mind? How do you not know that, he had this soldier mentality that you have to be ready to go at any moment, right? So you can't be cloudy, you can't be buzzed, you can't, you got to be ready. So, he lived his life that way, and a lot of those guys, did as well. Yeah, they were out drinking, they were out doing stuff, but they weren't getting out of control. They weren't overdoing it, and that was, when the drugs came in, the narcotics, that was a whole different thing, because guys would, get addicted, and then, it would spiral downward from there. But, with alcohol, you drink too much. Most of the time you make an idiot of yourself and you pass out, right? But, with narcotics, you get high and you survive it, and then you got to get more. You keep chasing the dragon, and, you'll sell, whatever to get, your next.
You get caught up, you do anything to get out of that situation.
Right. And that's why another reason my grandfather, he always claimed that he was never involved in narcotics, and, they were, the French Connection and all that. Yeah, there were narcotics there. And I'm sure he got, for lack of a better term, royalties or white envelopes that were a result of the, the things that they were doing, but he was not ever knowingly and actively involved in any kind of narcotics. He was absolutely against it, and
And when you look at even today, or not today, but like when the CIA was involved with bringing in all the cocaine, even back then, I mean, a lot of other people benefited besides the family. Like you said, there's a lot of government, of course, were involved in a lot of different things of that nature too, without quote unquote saying directly they were involved, but things move, and when ships and stuff move, you guys have information,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So they can't just point their finger and say, "Oh, you guys were responsible for all this stuff coming in. We knew nothing about it."
Yeah. Well, they could say that, and they do, but that's not. Yeah, we all know that's not reality.
Yeah, on a bigger scale.
Right.
Now, I was watching something, and they said that the big wedding in The Godfather was based on a wedding that your family had. Is
My
that
mom
true?
and dad.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
And, 1956 in New York City. Yeah, and they had 3,000-4,000 people
Hey,
there.
that's
And they
crazy.
had representation from every mafia family in the whole country.
Wow.
Plus congressmen, senators, the
Wow.
local New York state government. Everybody was at and it was a gala event. And we see the old home movies of it, and it was just it was out of control. They had a 7-tier cake, and that somebody made. Tony Bennett sang.
Wow.
He was a young
Wow.
Brooklyn
Yeah.
kid back
Yeah.
then, and he was the one of the entertainers. It was just and the weddings were the big way to especially for somebody like my grandfather. That was a showcase of his power and his and that was at the height of everything in 1956. So.
Did your dad ever get to meet the Rat Pack or any of those guys, like from back in the day? Because I've seen pictures. I know what was his name? For the Sammy Davis Jr., you had Frank Sinatra, and they show pictures of Frank Sinatra going back and forth with Cuba, and he kicked with a lot of mob guys. Did you, your family, you ever meet any of those guys?
Well, yeah, I mean, in New York is a historic, and Italian restaurant in Manhattan, and Frank Sinatra used to go there. So yeah, they were always they weren't buddies or anything like that, but yeah, they met and ran in the same circles, but so, and it was not like you said, for them, probably for Sinatra, these guys were celebrities, so to speak, right?
Because he wanted to be in that circle.
They were just They were just in awe of him as they were of each other. So, but yeah, they didn't. I don't have any stories of them hanging out or doing anything like that. But I know, I know they were in the same circles. So yeah, because
what about
Sinatra like that, and that was part of his. That was who he was, right? So.
Yeah, because he was always. I mean, as far as he was before my time, but when I used to see like old movies and. He was always that classy dude, and he, like you said, he looked up to the mobsters. He was like that presence. That whole element that was part of his little thing. What about and I've only heard stories but before Castro, Havana was the place. They seemed like that was like the go-to, the gamble and the hang out. What do you have any stories about Havana and your family being involved?
Well, yeah, they owned a casino down there, and they spent a lot of time in Havana, and it was like I said, the 50s were good years, and Batista was a personal friend of my grandfather, and he was who Castro replaced, took over from, and yeah, they were
that was a gold mine.
I guess it was. My dad died in January 1st of '08, but the Obama era had started, and they started talking about relationships and fixing the relationship and ending the blockade with Cuba.
Okay.
And my dad was all he was all for that because he felt that they was going to go back and if it goes back to the way it was before Fidel Castro took over. He owned some they had some rights. I don't know if on paper they had it documented, but that was their territory, and when Castro came in and wiped them out, so I
remember in The Godfather, remember they were sitting there, and Al Pacino, and they're at Havana, and they had to hurry and get out of there because Castro was
right. I mean, they were partying.
Yeah, they were partying. Yeah.
And they thought, because Batista was, they believed that they were fine, and then, then they weren't, right?
Wow. So was Vegas an offshoot to make up for that? Havana, or was Vegas already? You said it's kind of
Vegas was already, was a dream, of the,
Whose vision was that?
It was Lansky's and Lucky Luciano,
Okay.
and it was mafia related, but it was completely separate from at least the Bonanno family.
Okay.
But they just my grandfather didn't want Vegas to happen because Tucson was his, he loved Tucson, and he didn't want any of that element anywhere near, he didn't want the headaches and everything that would
bringing all that
he knew,
yeah.
right, any closer than, he left New York for a reason, right? And then they brought it, out to him. So he was never big on the Vegas scene, or, it wasn't like he was not, was unwelcome, but,
Okay.
it was just like hands off. You guys do what, they let them do what they wanted, but they weren't too involved in the whole Vegas thing.
Okay. Yeah, because I know that the vision in the desert, and it shows like the families coming out there and the flamingo and
Right.
all that
The
stuff, the Riviera,
yeah.
back in the heyday, and now it's all corporate. So.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I remember like in the '80s when I was just out of high school and getting out of college, I would go to Vegas, and they would set us up, and I never had to pay for anything, so I took that as well. They have some
Yeah.
connections still,
Yeah.
because I got comp stuff, and
Yeah.
it was like, okay, live like 20-something years old living like a high roller, which is fine with me. But that was really the extent of my experience with the Vegas stuff.
Have you in relation to like going out places, and I know like when you have certain contacts, whether celebrity or business, you get kind of carte blanche. Is there anything that sticks out where going out with your maybe your dad or your family as a child like that, where you guys were treated like royalty, and you're like, man, this is the life right here, man?
Well, any place my grandfather went, they seemed to, they knew, well, he only went places where he knew, the proprietors of the restaurant, and they always gave him, the nicest table, and, never had to wait. And, even just, what was it, like 2011, 2012, I went to New York and was with, Gary Cannellini, my uncle, and we went into Peter Luger's, is a, steakhouse in Brooklyn, right? Very popular. You can't get in there. There's, long wait to get in. Gary walked right up, said something to the guy. I mean, the seas like parted, and we got a table right in, Peter Luger's in Brooklyn. So
wow.
That was really impressive because there was a lot of people there, and you could just tell by the way they were dressed. They were some really important people that were waiting in the bar and waiting outside, and we just walked in and sat down and ate, and I didn't think much of that because I had seen it, that happened before.
Yeah.
But I happened to be with a friend of mine from high school that we hadn't seen each other in years, and we got together. We just both happened to be in New York, and he posted it, and he just thought that was the greatest thing that's ever happened. So, and it was, looking back, you're like, oh yeah.
Wasn't a big thing too, like for as far as like the mafia, when they had their neighborhoods, they make sure that they were safe. I mean, where now these guys, they're doing stuff in the neighborhood. I mean, the person get robbed next door. I mean, that was like a no-no. You didn't go into certain people's neighborhoods. You knew like if something happened, they were going to find that guy.
Oh, absolutely. And everybody knew, in the neighborhood,
knew
how it
yeah.
worked. And they, the risk wasn't worth, the reward, right?
Yeah.
It was way more risky because they knew, they would, if you did something to somebody's mom or their property, they were gonna.
Oh, dude,
they're gonna,
worse than the police.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that, made them all follow the rules. It's, outsiders came in, and
Yeah.
That's where the issues would happen. But yeah, as far as in the communities, they were pretty secure and safe. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember, I can't remember. Well, actually, I can't remember. I remember, but I do remember listening to something, and the guy said the difference was, a gang. When we were gangsters or these type of gangsters, my mom could walk down the street in a fur coat and her diamonds and not have to worry about anything happening to her. That's when you know that you had something. You guys had your community where it should be because everybody was safe.
Right.
You didn't have to worry about something, like you said, people knew not to cross over to certain neighborhoods in Brooklyn and do any of that stuff over there. You do not go over there and do that.
Right. I mean, like you said, you could, but you knew the risk you were taking. It wasn't just, some old lady and, her son is, the whole community was going to find you.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't stop until they did. Going
Now,
back to what I said, they all knew it was coming. Anybody who ever got it knew what they did.
Now, there's a show on, I can't remember what network, Godfather of Harlem. I think it's called. And it's Forrest Whitaker. I think he's Bumpy Johnson. And it depicts your grandfather, as one of the characters. I can't remember the actor that plays him, but...
Right, but he was a good big. I mean, I don't know his name either. Palmieri, maybe.
Yeah, he's been in a bunch of mafia.
Right, and
yeah,
he played a good role. Although,
played a good role.
The storyline was just
out of whack,
far fetched. Yeah, they had said that that Bumpy killed my grandfather's son, who would have been my uncle, and to get him back for that, he flooded drugs into Harlem to make all the all the black people suffer because they killed his son.
That's all bullshit.
That was totally it was not even in the realm of reality. But they used his name and whatever likeness or whatever you want to call that. But yeah, I saw only the first 2 free episodes of that.
That's the one
saw that storyline and said, this is. I didn't watch the rest of it.
Although
I like Forrest Whitaker.
Yeah, me too.
And everything up to that, it was kind of
But he did know Bumpy Johnson.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, they ran. Harlem was like they said, they knew Brooklyn, the territories.
Yeah,
they knew and my grandfather was keen to live and let live in those terms. It's like you don't step on my territory. I won't mess with your territory. And yeah, they came to an agreement. And,
okay.
But it wasn't about killing his son and revenge.
See, that's what trips me out with Hollywood because you wonder who they consulted with to come up with that story, or maybe they're trying to make it to where it's more dramatical or something, or.
Yeah, the only thing I can guess, and it's a complete total guess, was that it's name recognition, right? They had to work the name Joe Bonanno if they're going to have the a gangster story of any sort, in Harlem, in those years, they were going to have to bring the Bonanno name into it somehow, and that's just. Somebody came up with that. Some writer came up with that storyline.
So what eventually led to your family coming out to Arizona?
Well, originally they came out in the 40s.
Okay.
My dad had an ear infection, or I forget what the condition was called. But back then they used to say, "Oh yeah, go out into the desert in the sun, the dry climate, and it'll clear that up."
Okay.
So my grandfather came out here, and he loved Tucson because Sicily is latitudinal. It's pretty similar, and it has Bougainvillea and had the rock, the mountains like Camelback, and the mountains looked, there's some similar.
So it looks like Sicily,
You'd be surprised because in the center, Sicily's shaped like a triangle, and all around it is ocean, but in the center of the island, there's really dry, rugged, looks a lot like Tucson. I don't know if you've been to Tucson, but there's the Catalina Mountains, that overlook the city, and they're 10,000-foot mountains, and it's pretty majestic, the Catalinas. And grandfather fell in love with that, so he came out here in the 40s to have a second home, and whatever when his time in New York came to an end in the late 60s, and he agreed to retire to Arizona. So that's when he pretty much still involved, but not on day-to-day in operations anytime after the 60s. So, and I was born in '63, so I remember coming to Tucson as a little kid, and then I went, so I've always been coming out here, and then it became a thing where they had the relocation program, the witness protection program.
Oh yeah,
they picked Arizona, and it just kind of, it just became a thing, and that's where retired mobsters go. My dad used to say that,
Did a lot of guys try to follow suit after, like, man, Arizona man should come out there? And he's like, don't bring it out. Don't bring it out.
He didn't want it, but they, they were people that were coming out, they were coming out here to
get away.
To see Grandpa, and they would. You were talking about checking in. Anyway, those guys they went and checked with went down to Tucson, made sure it was cool, and then they were they came to Arizona. So
okay, well, man, this interview's been so insightful, and the information, because like I said, you hear stuff secondhand, and people write books. I mean, what book would you say, if you were to tell our audience, that's more true to word as far as in which you your family's depiction than anything else? Because there's a lot of books out there, and some of these people, they just write stuff, and a lot of stuff is maybe kind of fabricated. What book would you say is the most authentic to your family's?
Well, my grandfather's book. Because he lived it, and that's his memoir.
Okay.
So he was my dad's book is telling a lot of my his dad, my grandfather's stories, and
Okay.
repeating them. A lot of the stuff, he did live firsthand, but my grandfather's book, they're all firsthand accounts. He was there, and he, like I said, he was always teaching, and he wanted to, like he describes omerta, what it really meant, La Cosa Nostra, and those kind of things. So I would recommend, I would say this one.
Okay.
But then the Good Guys book is a real fun story. It's a novel, but it's just great the way, the Russian mob came into Brooklyn. And it's a great story, and I've been trying to get that made into a movie, because to me it reads like a movie script, and even had a script written, and we've been trying to sell that, and we're still at it, but so far it hasn't happened, but I'm not done.
Yeah. Well, hey man, we get a lot of people watching our show, so who knows, as far as when this is all said and done. Is there anything else as far as like social media wise you want to share with our audience as far as if they want to find any?
Well, I have a Facebook page that I started after when my dad died. Kind of a little bit of a tribute to him, because he was getting into all this stuff when he died in '08, and that it's called Bonanno on the Mafia. It's a Facebook page, and I've been toying with posting things from the books and some of the sayings, and but yeah, that would be anybody wants, reach me, that's, it's a good way to reach. You can ask any questions. If I'll answer what I can, based on, it's been a while since I've read these books, but, I'm rereading them, and people are always questioning things, and, it's kind of fun to go back and I'm thankful I have the resource, right? I could just go look it up. It's right here.
So your reference to this book as far as Good Guys and how you talk about the Russian mob, you brought another question that I wanted to ask in regards to that, because I recall a guy I did time with who was a mob guy, and he was Italian. He was saying how in the 80s the Russians started coming over with their mob, and they got a whole another element that they came in and was kind of maybe possibly stepping on some toes. How all that play into them when they started making moves into New York and into a lot of the rackets.
Yeah, that's a fascinating story. And in fact, I had asked my dad directly, very similar question, because it just, to me, it was fascinating, because, these guys came in, the Sicilian Italian mob, ran New York 40, 50 years, right? In Brooklyn especially. And then all of a sudden these Russian guys come in, and my dad respected them because they were so close knit. Yeah. And he really, they talk about not talking or not, not ratting out anybody. I mean, the Russians they even impressed the Sicilians,
they don't play on.
Right, yeah. And it's like, and those guys didn't know the history and didn't care who they were going in. They were going in, they were going to, make their mark and do what they were going to do. Yeah. And they they barged right in. And that's the beauty of that, to me, the beauty of that story is it really gives you a good description of how they integrated and how basically the Russians took over,
Wow.
And they're tight knit, and like I said, they had a lot of respect, for their tightness. Now the way they went about things, and they didn't appreciate that, and particularly one of the things I remember my dad saying is like, in the mafia, in the Sicilian mafia, Italian mafia, they only dealt with people who were part of it, right? Mm-hmm. They never got involved with families or anybody's, but the Russians didn't care.
They don't mess around.
They went after everybody, and he didn't, that wasn't part of their code. Russians did it different, and he didn't appreciate that.
It seemed like, especially, from what I've seen just in movies like the Russians, if you're involved, you don't want to cross those guys, because when they come in, they're coming. Almost like the cartel, how they kind of, it seemed like they structure kind of like how the mafia, when they have the structures and stuff, but they've taken it to a whole nother level too.
Absolutely.
Where they're not messing around, and dude, there's so many of them now where it's like, it's a whole nother, thing going on there.
Yeah.
So
it's definitely a new chapter. So.
Well, man, it's been great talking with you, man. I appreciate the time and opportunity, and just all the information. And I look forward to doing maybe some projects with you in the future, man.
Great, yeah, I really appreciated your open-mindedness, and not just wanted to talk about the where the bodies are buried, so to speak.
Yeah.
But the structure and what basically it's family, and I appreciate you having me on here to talk about it.
And I want to give props, man, as far as the things that were instilled in you. making who you are the man today, and just the insight, because you telling me about like your grandfather speaking several languages and learning how to navigate shit. It's all this stuff. It's a lot of emphasis on education, and that's one of the things that, as far as if you instill that in your kids, no matter what they're doing, it gives a certain amount of value and sense of self. And it's just, you need that, going through life. As far as raising your family, you can't have just a bunch of people just, acting a fool. You gotta have, if you have a certain level of intellect, you recognize and respect things at a certain level. And that's what, in my opinion, which gave you guys, as far as your family, the respect in a lot of different areas, because everybody treated each other at a certain level, but you're also men of intellect, which that also gives a certain value to a conversation. So, hey man, that was new to me. I never knew about that, and like I said, I'm big on education and just the way you treat people, and man, it's been an honor, man.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, Big Herc 916, fresh out, Joe Bonanno. Hit that subscribe button, share the channel. I'm out.